Well, thank you so much, everybody, on this panel. It was fascinating, and I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about some of the kind of aha moments, as well as some of the kind of challenges. But let's start with that part of it. Beyond the kind of advantages that we've heard about of doing interdisciplinary research, how has it personally enriched, I guess, your own intellectual journey, maybe even your own understanding of your home discipline? Can you recall a kind of aha moment where you saw yourself in the eyes of the other through that kind of collaborative moment? Sure, go for it.
Are we on? Thank you. I think sometimes we collaborate and continue to do what we were doing. So we're doing things in parallel just next to the collaborator. What I've started to learn is that our terminology, our communication, our narrative needs to change so that there truly is a shared vision. So we're still leaning into our strengths, but we're really moving out of our silos. I think that's something that I've learned from this project, and it's sort of moved into the other work that I've been doing as well. That we can't just say, and I think you pointed to that, we can't just say that we're working in an interdisciplinary space if we just keep doing what we've been doing next to the next person who's always done what they've always done. So for me, it's really making sure that those silos are broken down and we come together. We had a conversation recently about taking research to scale, but if we keep using research terminology when our end users are out of research and we're using terms like implementation and scale, and that terminology is not understood and not valued, and there's no traction of that. So making sure that we truly understand what that next person is looking for.
Tim or Emma or Christine?
Oh, it's all right. I've still got one there.
Great. Perfect.
So what I found, for my experience with Alguan, I was originally approached from a philosopher and workers in humanities, and I was like, it was a little bit outside of my area. I hadn't worked in Tourette's before. And I was like, well, sure, I'm happy to help and assist, but it was a little bit outside my area. But delving in and starting that collaboration just opened up a whole new world of all these interesting questions to ask, but also to be able to ask them in different ways. And that's led on now to a whole range of research stream of mine and many successful collaborations across different campuses as well as different institutions. And it's opened up different realms for funding and those opportunities as well.
Great. I just to that point, I guess, do you see what you were doing before differently now?
It's certainly emphasised the importance of working collaborative with and the importance of getting insights from different, not only academic spheres, but also from like working with patients and getting the actual input from what they find important as they're part of their lived experience.
Do you want to say anything?
I just wanted to say thank you to the two speakers who focused on their own research in particular. It was very inspiring. And it made me think that one of the things we need to do as scholars is actually demystify the process of how the interdisciplinary collaboration came about. So often we present the results of that research wrapped up in a parcel. This is what I found as a consequence of interdisciplinarity. But I think the beautiful thing about your papers was that it was demonstrating to us as listeners how you began that process of collaborating with people from other fields. And I think as scholars, we would do really well to sometimes publish or reflect or share the process of collaboration, because people need to know how to do it. It's not necessarily, sometimes it grows organically and that's marvellous, but sometimes it's much more intentional. And I think you were really making clear, I thought, when you were saying, you know, I thought we need this and then I'm going to go and speak to that person. And it would be helpful for our PhD students, for more junior colleagues, to have that process laid bare so that they can begin thinking themselves about how they begin to do that in their own work. So thank you both for the way you approach the presentations.
Emma, I've got a question for you as a convener, from one convener to another. What have you learnt about supporting interdisciplinary research, do you think? Kind of what are the key things that you've learnt that people need?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, you know, if you build it, they will come. In that I found that people do get attracted to, you know, come along and hear about the Science and Society Network, hear about our seed funding, if they are that way inclined. And, you know, it's not for everyone, but I suppose my instinct was that there are people across the university who really would like the opportunity. And it happened that those people, you know, found the network and found the support. And also how people really love that cohort and the camaraderie of people who are interested in interdisciplinary research, even though they've got nothing to do with their own research area. There is a kind of a character of that people who like that collaboration. Maybe it is that kind of intellectual curiosity of wanting to be with people who do think differently, because it's, you know, it's the old adage of the elephant, and knowing and just wanting to understand what it's like to see the elephant in a very different way. And I suppose just the other point is that for every success story, there are a lot of people for whom the project hasn't worked, and I'm sure probably for all of us here on the panel, there's interdisciplinary collaborations that have fallen flat, that haven't led to anything, or maybe they've just changed the way we've thought about something, but haven't actually resulted in a project. So it does take time, and you can't expect everything to work. So that's another issue to keep in mind.
Thanks. Okay, so we've got some questions, hands up. I'm going to ask one more before a call from the audience.
Cheers, call.
Yeah, look, I don't have a problem with taking the chair's privilege. Thank you, Christine. Well, on that point that Emma just brought up is about, I guess, some of the hurdles or the challenges, the things that can go wrong. Those of you who have done these interdisciplinary projects, what would you go back and tell yourself, or perhaps like what have been some of the bigger challenges that you've faced in kind of sustaining these projects over time? Yeah.
I think I went with the solution I was looking for. That was probably one of the biggest mistakes. I had an idea in my mind of where my research wanted to take me, and I almost knew the end point where I wanted to be. What I've learnt is I need to understand what's the carrot for them. What are their biggest challenges, the collaborators? What has worked for them in the past? What hasn't worked for them in the past? What could be a solution? And by having that really authentic understanding of what is in it for them, then you can come to the party together. You remember your first conversation with collaborators, you've got your beautiful little presentation ready to go. This is my research, this is the pilot work, these are the answers that we've got, do you want it? You're sort of forcing it on them. But what I've really understood is we need to listen first, understand their perspective, and then together come to that collective understanding of where we need to go now.
I'm going to flip this a little bit.
It's your privilege.
So I think from the get-go, our biggest challenge was trying to come up with a cohesive story to attract funding for the project, with no track record in working together, no track record in working with this population. And so really what this scheme allowed, this hatch in incubation grants allowed, was us to start that collaboration, develop that track track record of working together, have pilot data that showed the feasibility of this project, and then led on to successful larger grant applications.
Great. Well, yeah, we'll take that as a quote. All right, so I've got a question over here and one from Andrea. So we'll go one and then Andrea.
Could you introduce yourself for us,
Yes.
please?
Yeah, my name is Edward Boyapati. I'm from a private RTO. Even in interdisciplinary research, there seems to be a disconnect between what academics are interested in, the topics they are interested in, and what people are interested in. Academics seem to be insisting on doing research which people are not interested in. As an example, the scholarly articles, of course, are barely read by public, but even non-scholarly articles are barely read. The YouTube videos put out by academics are barely watched. The public talks, for example, by academics are barely watched. These are all some examples. In the rare instances where academics becomes a star, like Jordan Peterson, they seem to quit academia. So there seems to be inverse relationship between what academics are interested in and what people are interested in. Why is that? Is it because the topics that people are interested in are too hard to handle, or what is it? Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody want to have a go?
Might as well keep the pattern going.
Go.
I think we don't map the ecosystem well enough. When we think of end users, it's quite a linear path, but in that ecosystem, there's so many different players, and each of those players have different interests, and they want different things. And I think we need to understand what each of those different players actually want so that we can talk to that. It may be the same thing in the end, but we've got a lot of soft assets that we could offer as well. The analytical process, the problem solving, the critical thinking. It doesn't have to be the product that we're talking about at the very end. So I think broadening our understanding of who is within our ecosystem as researchers. The other thing is science communication. Again, I keep pointing to Jonathan, but we spoke about, our talk of scale, which is really just making sure something's market ready. So using the right terminology that is understandable by all of those people in the ecosystem so that there is no outcasts within that. And I think we need to learn more from our participants, from the consumers, from the end users, so we can solve those real world needs a little bit better. There needs to be a lot more to that answer. Someone else.
Oh, really? I thought you covered that very well.
I thought that was an incredibly well-considered response and really, I think, highlighted a lot of the issues. But what I would also say is that early stage research may not necessarily be recognisable to the public as significant and important. And one of the roles that academics have is to do that early stage research. Now, when it comes to translation and commercialisation, that's another thing. And I agree with everything that you said in terms of the research ecosystem. But you can't always predict what people want or what people will need by what they're telling, what they're actually saying. That there's early stage research that is critical for research fields and disciplines to progress. And sometimes that's not easily translatable, and that is a challenge, but it doesn't mean it's not a valid thing to do. I guess that's my response.
Andrew, do you have a question?
So I had a question for Tim, but I also have a comment for this discussion that is just occurring. It seems to me that we need to get better at articulating our research projects in terms of the problems we're addressing rather than the research questions we're answering. I think too often we ask our PhD students or when we're helping with ARC applications, we ask, well, what's the research question? What's your aim? And therefore, what are your methods? And we completely forget about what I call the P box. We actually forget about the starting point, which is something out there in the world. And I think if we were better at articulating that, we might actually be better at generating that public understanding of the value of the work that we do. That's just...
It's the so what question.
It's the so what question, exactly, Christina. Yeah. What is the problem that this is actually, or the phenomenon, or the practice, what I call the P box, that this is actually engaging with? And the research question comes out of that and the gap in knowledge, not the research question first. Yeah. Anyway, that's just my little contribution to that little discussion. But the question I had for Tim follows from Christina's point that we ought not to pigeonhole HAS as a handmaiden to STEM. So, Tim, I want to ask you to unpack a little bit more for us. What was the impact for you in your discipline of taking seriously that question about human experience and having HAS researchers with you to help you understand the nature of that human experience? What then was the impact of that back on your research questions in your own field?
Very good question. Yeah, so first off, I guess it was initially a little bit daunting, and then trying to think about, particularly because this was a concept that is within the black box of our brain. It's not something that's clearly externally measurable. So, but then that turned into a challenge to go, all right, how can we design cognitive neuroscience experiments that can try and tap into this? But, and I think it has expanded the way that I now approach other projects of my research too, because I realise that sometimes it relates to the question we had just before. This is not just about academics telling the public what they want, but engaging with the end users themselves, whether that's a patient or some product end user, and getting an idea of what are the needs of the individuals for us to be able to provide solutions to.
So in other words, understanding that human experience of the patient then changes how you approach the treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, we put an assumption on what's the most important things, and it might not be correct.
Thanks. Brett Bryan, School of Life and Environmental Sciences, and early theme leader of Science and Society Network, I seem to remember. Great to see where this has all come over the years. Just a challenge. Great that we're talking about interdisciplinarity, but why are we still talking about interdisciplinarity and not transdisciplinarity? So in the two excellent talks, and really high quality talks, the school kids, you're working with the cohort of children and learning from them. There's a richness of information that comes from it. Or the Tourette's patients, you're working with them. In my own field, we work with local communities, catchments, and different groups and so on to try and solve environmental challenges. And we really can't solve these problems without understanding the context of what's going on. And if we're still doing interdisciplinarity, are we risking excising ourselves from that richness and still being in that ivory tower that researchers have been criticised for centuries?
I can speak from my project. I think it was interdisciplinary in the creation of the platform. The engineers did the engineering. We did the health-related gold standard assessment. That was within our discipline. I think the overall platform went beyond that. That was transdisciplinary. What we offered back to our end users with their contribution was transdisciplinary. but then there's sections within that you stay within your expertise. You would hate terminology to put people off. We're working together, both interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. Does that sort of answer the question from my project? But I'm sure there's a much bigger answer. You got it?
No. I just realised you were looking at me as though I will make a comment, which is, which is a kind of infrastructural comment. Like, I think fundamentally still universities are structured around disciplines. And so early career scholars who ask me, like, should I do this kind of project with a STEM researcher? There's always part of you that's thinking, yes, but you need to be grounded in discipline because you're going to find a job in a discipline. And I think that is just a major change that we need to see if you want that.
And I think it also happens incrementally. So starting even with interdisciplinary research also opens up two different spheres that information is being conveyed to, which then opens up further interdisciplinary work. And so, like for example, our own it's not just patients, but it's also philosophy and it's also clinicians. And then from that work, that we hear from clinicians going, well, actually, this might be relevant for obsessive compulsive disorder and other things. And then, so that grows and grows, but it's not always going to be right there from the seed.
Picking up on something you said, Tim, it might make me sound incredibly old-fashioned, but I also think that good collaboration comes often from people with deep disciplinary knowledge who then bring those skills and knowledge and capabilities to a transdisciplinary project. So while the structures of universities, yes, do in a sense mitigate against the kind of collaborations we're talking about here, we still do have to train people in deep disciplinary foundations so that they have that really strong grounding to bring to those conversations. And this is a tiny bit off topic, but one point I wanted to make in this panel was, and from the perspective of the ARC, you will have seen from the discussion paper that the board put out about its vision for the new National Competitive Grants program, that there's an appetite from the board for this high-risk, high-reward research. And I think we do have to have a conversation as a community about what that really means and how we agree to fund it. Because high-risk, high-reward means developing an appetite to fail, and it picks up on something you were saying, Emma. And the ARC, like many national research funders, is a peer review system. And a peer review system means that the ARC, it's not the ARC out there and the academic community here, it's actually a partnership because grant applications need to be peer reviewed. So we, I think, as an academic community, need to have a conversation about how do we assess and reward people who are trying to do something different, who are being prepared to take a risk, who want to go out on a bit of a limb. And there needs to be training and a willingness to support that. And they're really difficult conversations to have because often people say, oh, bloody ARC, they won't fund my great research. That'll never get up. Well, it's not the ARC, it's actually the academic community. So the conversations have to begin there in a peer review system, I guess.
The call's coming from inside the house. Tiffany, and then we've got one up the back, and then Russell.
Thank you. Thanks. Tiffany Shellham from History at Deakin. I've really enjoyed this discussion already and just wanted to kind of riff off some of your comments, Christina, about demystifying, like the importance of demystifying the process and the collaboration. And I think, the two speakers, the projects were really well articulated in that respect. I think collaboration is so much fun. It's really hard. Interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work is really fun and it's really challenging. How do you sort of spend the time, I guess, convincing your team to to take the leap ontologically, especially when you're dealing with potentially different knowledge systems, not just or competing knowledge systems, not just different disciplinary guidelines. How do you build that trust into your relationships? And I think currently large grant bodies like the ARC probably don't or maybe aren't particularly attuned to needing to fund that time to build a team to actually build that trust and relationship, because that's actually what's going to have the biggest impact if people can trust each other enough to kind of suspend their own disbelief and sort of jump into the other kind of world experience. So I've just wanted to kind of throw that open as a topic, because I think that time that we need to build relationships and build trust is really, really key to the success of a project. Oh, you don't. I'm looking at you and you have no facility to.
Yes. I was thinking before that my own background is in Indigenous, working in Indigenous health, and how that in some ways really is interdisciplinary in itself, in that you and also goes back to this question about public, what the public thinks about it, which is something that's talked about a lot as social license in universities, and just the idea that you don't go expecting anyone to be on the same page. And I think that's partly what we're talking about with interdisciplinary research. But I think coming from working with Indigenous Australians and working in Indigenous health, or in any field working with Indigenous people, I think you come with that assumption of, like, I don't assume anyone is going to share what I think is important, to have the same priorities, and it's really up to me to both, make the case as to why I think this is important, but also be open to learning and to saying, okay, well, this is not how I thought it was, and maybe I need to shift this to make it more meaningful to the people for whom it needs to matter. So I think, and quite a few of the projects that I discussed, and also Tim Neal's work and your work, is really working with Indigenous people, and I think that is, so I think it definitely relates to that a similar mindset of grounding in really being open and being prepared to make the case for what you see. And I think that's also what we need to do with the public as well. There is a lot of discussion about this kind of crisis of social license within universities, and we both need to preserve that space for that disciplinary specialist conversations, but also be better at explaining what we do and explaining the value of what both disciplinary and interdisciplinary research can offer.
Anybody else want to have no contribute back there?
Hi, I'm Ella. I guess I'm a lifelong fan of interdisciplinarity. I work in early childhood, actually, but I'm here out of interest. Further to what Tiffany said, and also what we were talking about that sort of demystifying process and that trust and that time involved, and how that maps onto kind of your funding and your practice. I wondered if any of you had anything you wanted to share with us about kind of how the meat of your day has changed, trying to take an interdisciplinary approach to things, whether you're finding that actually you're spending your day differently, you're doing moments differently, are you communicating differently, are you taking notes differently, and whether you're feeling the pressure of a funding system that isn't quite sure how to do that, and those kind of sort of neoliberal pressures about efficiency and certainty and things, about whether you're sort of feeling kind of like part of the resistance kind of thing.
That was a heavy question.
Yeah.
So my background is education. I was a teacher for over a decade, and then in initial teacher education, and I often felt like we were being researched. We were being researched on. It's a big institute and building with lots of kids, so they're a captive audience for whatever new research comes along. So I came from a position of resistance a little bit. I don't know why I told you that. I just told you that. What I think is really important is to be that person that someone comes to, is to do your job really, really well. And you don't want to lose that when you start to stretch yourself across all of the other things that you now have to do. So if you are a really rigorous researcher and you turn up on time, you have your minutes done on time, your papers are polished, they're really good quality, you do all of those little bits really well, people start to come to you. I also think that it does mean that you have to be willing to learn the other language. So for me, I'm learning about shutter speed and all of these technical terms, and I sometimes think, are you even speaking English when I'm listening? But I have to know enough that I am then also that person that people come to. So it definitely takes longer, but the rewards are huge. I've currently got an ARC, not for this project, but for another project, and it's all around working with others and what others not can pop on at the end, but what they bring at the start to shape my research question and to give me the questions to the answers that I'm looking for. If that makes sense. I really didn't answer your question at all. Did I?
Well, I mean, I think you did in that sense of that sustained relationship.
Yeah.
It's such a thing that says, yeah, you build trust with people by these ongoing relationships. And if we're only ever talking to each other.
Yeah, it becomes very self-serving. But I think do be the best you can be in your discipline. I think your point was beautiful, so that others then start to want to come to you to learn, and you're doing the same, learning from others.
I guess in terms of what it's changed on a daily practice, I think it has changed the way that I try and write about and communicate my work. I think going through science, and you go do a PhD, and you're becoming more and more focused in a narrow field. And then you get so, used to the nuanced little language within that field. And then it goes to the point you were saying before about, well, then what's the so what? And so I think once you start working with people outside your field, and trying to approach these kind of projects for funders as well, and I think maybe Emma, you were saying before, when you first got your grant to review, it was in a completely different field. I can't review this. Actually, you realise, well, if someone's not communicating beyond their own field, then they actually haven't done a good enough job at convincing you of the importance of that research. So I think that's probably been the biggest thing, is being able to convey that importance to a not just a lay, but just for different perspectives.
Yes, Russell Kennedy from SCCA. Just picking up on your point before, Christine, about the encouraging failure, and I think that's really hitting it right on the nail right on the head there, because if we're not failing, we're not trying, and you've got to push beyond what has been done before, and to just improve on what has been done before isn't creating innovation. It's that breakout thinking that does that. And Emma, you're talking about a structure for that, and we don't have it. I come from a design background, so we do have structures, and I'm not saying that they necessarily work, but they have been adopted outside of the discipline. There's participatory design, as was mentioned before, and then there's also double diamond, convergent thinking, divergent thinking, and sort of following that path. But Stanford came up with a design thinking methodology, and that is interesting because it actually, even though it's called design thinking, the designer is taken out of the lead role in the process, and so there's a starting point of empathy, which is that really key element of it, followed by discovery, followed by ideation, and that's where the designers historically have come in, at that ideation phase, and then there's prototyping and testing. Now, that even at the ideation phase, that process doesn't ask for designers to come up with the ideas. It's a collaboration, multidisciplinary approach in those first three steps, which is really crucial. It's not until the prototype stage that actually you do split off into your disciplines and you do what you're good at. But that even is a linear process. and you don't really know whether it's going to succeed until you finish that process, that prototyping process. So the collaboration is based very much at that empathy stage right at the start, where the client or the owner of the company or the government minister or whoever doesn't know everything. You then go back 2 steps before that to learn that. So, and those conversations are not pushing your own discipline. It's someone else talking about your discipline and so on until you distill it into a brief and then work through it. So I don't really have a question, but I just want to reinforce and say everything I've heard today is terrific, and congratulations.
With that, I'd like everybody here to join me in another round of applause for our excellent speakers.